everyone, and welcome to Spirit Basics. It's the show for both the beginner and the avid connoisseur of fine spirits. I'm Jennifer Allan.
And I'm Stephen Olson. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about classic cocktails and their ingredients, specifically vermouth.
Now, I know vermouth is in the martini,
Indeed.
but tell us what it is.
Well, vermouth is an aromatized wine. And what that means is that, there are two different styles. Let's talk about them. There's the white style or the dry style, or we also call it the French style. Then there's the red style, which is sweeter, and we call that the Italian style. The red, the sweet, is what we see in the Manhattan. The dry, the white, is what we see in the martini.
Now, you said aromatized wine. Mm-hmm. Does that have something to do with aromatics, obviously?
Yes, of course it does. Aromatized wine is a wine that is fortified, and it's fortified, that means we add alcohol, and in this case it would generally be a distillate of grapes. It's aromatized by adding spices, herbs, flowers, roots, plants, whatever it is that give it its flavors. Now, the origins of these are quite fascinating. The Italian vermouths probably go all the way back to at least the 1200s. That was when we talked about steeping herbs and flowers for medicinal purposes and so forth. And the first sweet vermouth as a category probably goes back to about 1750, and that would be the Cinzano. That was the first. The dry vermouth, the French style, happened about in the 1850s with the advent of a company called Noy Prat. And this weird rivalry develops between not only the two styles, but the two countries, France and Italy. And for everyone in that area in the Mediterranean drinking these, trying to decide which style was best. And interestingly enough, today, most companies that make vermouth make both styles.
Well, if it's both French and Italian, why do they call it vermouth?
It's a great question. Vermouth actually comes from the German word Wermut or the Anglo-Saxon word Vermouth. Either way, they both mean the same thing, which is that evil ingredient in absinthe, wormwood, which we'll talk about in a much later episode. Now, interestingly enough, the first evidence that we have describing these goes back to about the 1500s. And think about the Alps separating Italy and France. On the eastern side of the Alps, you have Italy, and that's where the sweeter styles develop. On the western side of the Alps, you have France, and that's where the drier sides developed, okay? Now, interestingly enough, the Italians and French both created it as a medicinal beverage, which was a negative until the 20th century when the cocktail saved vermouth.
Well, for his own look at the history of vermouth and the classic cocktail, we turn to our master mixologist, Dale Degroff.
The cocktail is an American invention, just as American as apple pie, baseball, musical comedy, jazz, and, it's a composite beverage. It's almost a metaphor for the American people. We are a composite people. We came from around the world, and we brought with us traditions in beverage that were sometimes thousands of years old, and we put them all together, and they all ended up in that glass, and we called it a cocktail, a composite beverage for a composite people. But the evolution of the cocktail and the cocktail bar is a really interesting story. There were a lot of disparate forces that came together, all beginning with the Industrial Revolution. Because it was the Industrial Revolution that fueled the economy of the Northeast of the United States, that brought immigrants from Europe, that fueled the emergence of restaurants because people weren't growing their food anymore. We moved towards becoming an urban economy. Technology had a huge part. We discovered things like the artificial ice machine. In 1853, Alexander Twining patents the first artificial ice machine. How can you have a cocktail without ice? Ice is the soul of the cocktail. Way back in 1806, when the word was first used in print, ice was a luxury. They ship it down from the Great Lakes or from Boston down to New Orleans or wherever down there. And 40% of the stuff melts on the way down, and when you finally get it into the ice houses, who can own an ice house? Only a very wealthy person, so ice became important. The technology of infusing gas into water, soda, flavored sodas. The technology of pushing beer through lines with gas. All these things emerged in the middle of the 19th century. And then there was a political arm to this whole thing too. In 1830, there was a terrible potato famine in the British Islands, exactly 100 years after the first one that sent those distillers to Pennsylvania in the beginning. And that potato famine brought immigrants from the British Islands. Then there was the Napoleonic Wars, which sent tons of immigrants from the continental Europe with their trashed economy. And they all gathered into ghettos in the Northeast, and it was Tammany Hall and these big political machines that looked into those ghettos and saw power. And they went in there and they said to these guys who had their illegal social clubs, because they brought with them very strong communal drinking habits, the beer halls of Eastern Europe, the pubs of Ireland and England. And they gathered in these illegal social clubs carrying on that tradition. And these boys from Tammany Hall went in there and said, "Hey, O'Connor, how about we open a bar? We'll back you and get out of that illegal business that you're into." Why did they do this? They did this because they knew that the men gathered in these places, and if they put them in legitimate business in all the neighborhoods, maybe sometimes 5 or 6 of them in one block, and if they controlled those establishments, who hung out in those establishments? Men only. Who could vote? Men only. So the men, if they controlled these saloons, these taverns, they controlled the vote. They controlled the city, the precincts. So politics had a lot to do with the emergence of the cocktail bar and the cocktail bartender. It's a fascinating story, and a lot more. And by the way, Vermouth, hugely important. The Martini, the Manhattan, the middle of the 19th century, these were hugely important in the birth of the cocktail. Steve, Jennifer?
Next week, Dale will further explore the 2 different styles of vermouth, and he'll reveal more of his fascinating lore about the birth of the cocktail. But up next, we'll talk about how vermouths are made.
And our roving spirit insiders, Morgen and Scott, bring us a special report on the spirit world. That's when Spirit Basics returns. Welcome back to Spirit Basics. Right now we're going to talk about how vermouth is made. Now, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit more about the ingredients?
Well, let's talk about both styles, both sweet and dry, remember. And remember, it is indeed fortified wine. Every brand has their own different recipe, and they're all completely unique. But amongst the styles, they're basically consistent with some exceptions. You could find anything in here, from cloves, cinnamon, quinine is quite common, citrus peels in most of them, ginger, wormwood, tiny little bits, not very much anymore, coriander seeds, hyssop, chamomile, raspberries, rose petals, and the list goes on and on and on.
So is a dry vermouth always white and a sweet vermouth always red?
It's actually a very valid question because there are some notable exceptions. White or French implies dry, but there are sweet ones like, for example, Cinzano or Dubonnet or Lillet. Red or Italian implies sweet, but know that in all of the sweet vermouths, there's at least some bitterness, and you shouldn't confuse them with a very closely related category of bitters.
Now, bitters, do they taste exactly how the name implies?
Indeed, they're bitter, and you'll hear Dale talking about this a lot because they're classic ingredients for classic cocktails. In the original definition, we define a bitter as a spirit that is flavored with bitter roots like gentian or quinine. They usually have herbs and spices, and there are all different kinds. Some don't have any spices. English fruit bitters like orange. Then there are the cooking bitters that are very spicy like Angostura or Peychaud, where you just use a couple of drops in a cocktail, very small amounts. There are some that you can actually drink, like Unicum. Campari you definitely drink. Underberg, Fernet. And you need them because many of the classic cocktail recipes call for them, and most of these are fairly widely available.
Well, for more on the process of making both styles of vermouth, here is our spirit guide.
So instead of talking about 2 styles of vermouth, sweet and dry, just for a second, let's talk about 3, just for fun. There's actually 2 different kinds of dry vermouth made in France. There's one from the area of Savoie, off to the east, that's softer and certainly not as intense and bitter as the dry vermouth that you normally see from France. From Italy, of course, we have basically one style of vermouth, the sweet vermouth, which is essentially a red wine, a little bit of white wine, put in a barrel, put a bunch of flavoring ingredients in there like gentian, like quinine, which is the bark of the cinchona tree, age it for a while, put lots more bittering elements in there, and eventually sell it to somebody, something that's obviously bitter, certainly a touch sweet, and very complex, and I think can create a number of complex cocktails. You come to the dry vermouth style, which we normally associate with France, and it's a very complex series of steps it takes to make this stuff. You've got to start with white wine. You put a bunch of botanicals in the white wine. You put it in a barrel. Now leave it outside for, say, 2 years or so, or longer. Under the sun, under the weather, all that stuff, it gets really weird, gets really funky. Now you bump it up with alcohol, with basically a neutral grape spirit to drive it up to about 100 proof. And then you add a unfermented grape juice portion to it, and that's also had some grape spirit added to it. Blend them all together, leave those together, and it becomes certainly this wonderful, dry, crisp, but very complex drink as well. That's the vermouth thing.
Well, now that we've taken a look at the history, the origins, and the process of making vermouth, and discussed some of the key ingredients in classic cocktails, it's time for an inside look.
Our spirit insiders, Morgen and Scott, are on a search for knowledge about vermouth and the classic cocktail. Let's see what they found out.
Stephen, Jennifer, thank you very much. I'm here in New Orleans at the Museum of the American Cocktail with one of the founders, Ted Hay. And Ted, we're standing at the beginning with a gentleman that looks kind of like you actually in this picture. What is this? Can you tell us, take us through the whole museum?
Absolutely.
Start with right
first
here.
of all, this is Harry Johnson. To his great chagrin, he wrote the second important cocktail guide ever.
Not the first?
Not the first. He always said he did, but no one ever found that earlier copy. He kept saying, that's not Jerry Thomas, you know, I wrote that. I wrote something before that. Nobody ever found it. He wrote the second important bar guide ever. Very important though, because he gave us the rules for bartenders.
We start here, we see Jerry, and then where do we go? We begin the tour.
He takes you over, so come this way. The cocktail began in 1806, at least in terms of etymology. We know that the first time it was ever published was in the Balance and Columbian Repository in this strange way. You have a gain and loss column, and they said, you know, one of the losses was cocktail, the other one was my election. It took 60 years to get from that point to where they published some cocktail recipes in the bar guide. This guy, Jerry Thomas, the author of the first important bar guide, he listed every cocktail recipe he knew. There were 10 of them. But then what he didn't do was tell bartenders how to act. And there we go back to Harry Johnson again. And Harry Johnson said, the first rule to be observed by any man acting as a bartender in our business is to treat all customers with the utmost politeness and respect. He also said, show your patrons you are a man of business and endeavor to do only what is right and just by refusing to sell anything either to intoxicated or disorderly persons or to minors. Smart man, that Harry Johnson. Here we have a display we call the Electric Jolt. It's the beginning of the 20th century. The first thing I discuss is the fact that the most important thing that ever happened in bartending is electricity. After all, with electricity, you can clean the dark corners of a bar. Bars are more inviting. You can run a compressor and start serving carbonated water. You can make ice.
Where does it go from there? I mean, now we got electricity, cocktails are being made.
That's right. So what we're doing is we're developing more cocktails. Cocktails are becoming popular. They're being consumed at less controversial hours, right? People are liking them. The rich people are liking them. Everyone's liking them. You know who isn't liking them? The dry forces. Temperance. They see the increasing industrialization of society. People, natural human nature, want to blame one thing.
That's a look at the Museum of the American Cocktail and its classic cocktail history. We'll have part 2 of this interview next time. Right now, back to you, Stephen and Jennifer.
You know, there are classic cocktail recipes that require both styles of vermouth in the recipe, and Dale will show us how to do that later in the show.
Up next, we continue our look into the spirit world with a lesson on how to drink vermouth and how to use it in some of your favorite classic cocktails. Don't go away.
Spirit Basics is brought to you in part by Willow Park Wines and Spirits.
Welcome back to Spirit Basics, the show for everyone who wants to learn more about the world's best cocktails. Right now, we're going to talk about the proper way to drink vermouth.
Well, I'm not sure there's a real proper way, and remember, we always say no rules or regulations when it comes to enjoying your favorite beverages. However, remember that these were created for medicinal purposes. Originally, the whites were consumed as aperitifs. You'd drink them ice cold. The red ones were usually used as digestivos or amaros, and to this day are consumed that way in Italy. So it's very, very common. And remember also that these are essential ingredients in many classic cocktail recipes. I wouldn't personally recommend switching the white for the red or the red for the white in a cocktail recipe. But then again, if you were to substitute one style for another and you liked it, no rules or regulations, who knows? You might create your own new classic cocktail. I will just warn you, if you're in Europe and you order a martini in a bar that isn't familiar with this whole cocktail thing, you very well may get martini vermouth served to you versus a martini.
That actually happened to me in Germany.
It can happen.
For more advice on vermouth and aperitifs, we turn now to our spirit advisor.
All right, why do we even have aperitifs? Because aperitifs make us hungry. Why do they make us hungry? Because most of the aperitifs that we have some sort of bitterness to them, or most often some tartness, some acid to them. And acid can make us hungry. Well, why does that happen? Well, let's think about some of the things we drink to begin with. We might start with a glass of champagne with all these bubbles, or dry white wine, or a martini, a dry martini, or I may have a Campari and soda. In each of those cases, I'm going to drink that. I'm going to start to get a little bit hungry. And why? Because, like I said, acid right in that drink provides a reason, a methodology to get hungry. How's it work? It works like this. Let's say you bite into a lemon. What face do you make? You pucker, right? Because the acid in the lemon is looking for moisture. It wants to link up with the moisture, and the moisture is all in your mouth. So the acid's saying, give me moisture. Come on, I want the moisture right now. Give it to me. And the mouth is going, okay, I'm doing it to you as quick as I can. It's literally dragging your mouth into that lemon. So the next thing that happens is all the moisture's gone from your mouth, so your brain goes, well, he's dry, he's trying to talk, let's make him salivate. So then I begin salivating, and the next thing that happens is the brain says, why is he salivating? Is there food somewhere? Let's make the gastric juices go. So the gastric juices start going, and then my stomach starts grumbling, and I'm going, can I get served around here? I need some food, I'm hungry, right? So the drinks that we drink, they make us hungry. And vermouth, its bitterness, its tartness, it's all about making us hungry, and food always tastes better when you're hungry.
Our master mixologist, Dale Degroff, joins us now with a lesson on how to make a cocktail with vermouth.
Toward the end of the 19th century, when the cocktail palaces were thriving in big cities like New York, there were some great bartenders, and one of those bartenders was a guy named Johnny Solon. And Johnny worked at the Big Brass Rail, which is located where the Empire State Building is today, when it was the Waldorf, before it was the Waldorf Astoria, Hotel. And Johnny liked to use aperitif wines in his cocktails. As a matter of fact, he created one called the Bronx/income tax cocktail using fresh orange juice, just a little bit, maybe about 3/4 of an ounce, and sweet vermouth, which is famous, we know, from the Manhattan. One of the famous cocktail ingredients. It's a processed kind of wine. It's gone way beyond wine because it's spiced. It's reinforced with a little bit of extra alcohol. And I'm going to take some dry vermouth. These were always known in the 19th century as the white one, the dry one, as French vermouth, and the red one, the sweet one, as Italian vermouth. So I got a little bit of both in here, but that's not the key to this cocktail because this is a gin-based cocktail. Johnny called this the Bronx because the Bronx Zoo had just opened around the turn of the century, and he went for a visit. When he came back, he said sometimes he couldn't tell whether he was still at the zoo or not. Anyway, let's get some ice in there. And it's going to be an up drink, so I got my beautiful martini glass, which I think I can chill down a little bit here while I'm shaking. You can put it in your freezer at home and have it very icy cold by the time you're ready to make your drink. This is going to be garnished with a little bit of orange peel. Look how beautiful that is. And by the way, if you put a little bit of Angostura aromatic bitters in there, it becomes the income tax cocktail. Let's do it that way. It's a little spicier and quite nice. Yeah, shake it good because you want that fruit juice spread across your tongue, and when you shake it hard, those air bubbles help spread the flavors across your tongue. The harder you shake it, the better this cocktail is going to taste. I ain't a kidding. Now here we go. It's a beauty. Oh yeah. This is a turn of the century special, and we're going to give it a little bit. This is a knife called a channel knife the chef uses a lot, and it creates these pretty little spirals of orange and lemon peel. We'll drop one of those right in there. Let's do it nicely here, right for the camera. Is that a beauty? There we go. This is the Bronx or income tax cocktail by Johnny Solon from the Big Brass Rail, made with our specials. Aperitif wines called vermouth. Spicy, slightly reinforced with alcohol, and really flavorful. By the way, the spices in these vermouths came from the New World. This was a meeting of the Old World and the New World. The wines of the Old World, the spices of the Caribbean. So here we are, aperitif, and a good one too. Jennifer, Steve, a salud.
Now you see that? Dale used dry vermouth, sweet vermouth, and bitters all in the same cocktail. The cocktail is all about balance.
You know what? Cooking is all about balance. And
right.
after the break, we head into the kitchen with some recipes using vermouth. Don't go away. Welcome back to Spirit Basics. We're in the kitchen and we're joined by our spirit chef, Chef Allan. Now I can see you've got some examples here of some recipes using vermouth. We know that vermouth is made from wine.
Right.
So can you typically use vermouth as a substitute for some of your cooking wines?
You know, this is one of the chef's great little secrets, and that is when you don't have time to reduce wine or you don't have time to let things sit for a long time, is to use vermouth instead of white wine. It really adds an awful lot of depth and flavor, and it does it really quickly. And the dishes that we're here today, both a dessert and a regular dish, have a really unique taste, very similar to wine, but a lot deeper because of the vermouth.
We see here that we've got pears. Now, I was surprised to see pears because I wouldn't think of using vermouth for desserts.
Well, pears are a classic, more European type of a dessert, and they always have to be poached, or mostly you'll find them poached, and mostly you'll find them poached in wine. So once again, to give them a little stronger flavor, we've poached them in vermouth, and we've added some vermouth to the honey, which is going to give it even a double shot. And you can smell the vermouth coming off of that. It's just gorgeous.
Very nice. Now we've got salmon here. Salmon is one of my favorites, and I see you've got a basil sauce on that. But could you substitute the salmon with other fish or chicken?
You could use almost anything as a palate for this. Almost plainer would be better, because what you've got is you've got a really nice taste in the vermouth, and you've got herbs. In this case, we've got parsley, but again, you could use basil, you could use any other herb.
So at what point in preparing these dishes would you add the vermouth?
Normally with vermouth, you're going to add it earlier than later, again, because you want the depth. It's not a high alcohol content drink, and it's going to give you that flavor.
Well, I can't wait to try them. For more information on the recipes for these dishes, you can log on to our website. Back to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Jen. Aperitifs, digestivos, amaros, bitters. You know, we've been cooking with all of these ingredients since the very beginning. But that's it for this edition of Spirit Basics. Make sure and join us next week when we further explore the world of cocktails with a discussion of the new classic cocktails and the influences of cuisine on our flavor decisions. I'm Stephen Olson. For Jennifer Allan and our entire team here at Spirit Basics, we'll see you next episode. Cheers.
Special thanks to Willow Park Wine and Spirits, whose dedication to providing knowledge, awareness, and service to their customers has made this show possible.